Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and so far on the War Within Alpha, we've been trying to cover all of the class changes as closely as possible. We've taken a look at things like Death Knights, Shamans, Mages, Warlocks, and many more. However, we've barely covered my main class, the Rogue, as it hasn't gotten too many changes so far in the Alpha up until this week. We got our very first set of talent changes for specs like Assassination, Outlaw, and Subtlety, with some core changes as well that's going to wrap up the three specs together with some new passives and class talent adjustments. Of course, as soon as Rogues got the new changes, I spent quite a bit of time on the alpha, working through them, testing them out, and even logging some of these changes to see and observe how the Rogue is evolving. By no means does the Rogue feel like the current focus for the devs over on the Alpha, with Death Knights and Warlocks and Shamans and many others really taking a lot of the precedent, but I think over the next few weeks we'll probably see a more comprehensive update for Rogues that will give us a clearer picture of how the class is really meant to play in the War Within. So with that being said, I want to take a deeper dive into some of the new talent changes for Rogues, and if you want to see more class videos like these over on the Alpha, be sure to subscribe, otherwise let's dive right in. So when it comes to this week's build for Rogue changes, we got a handful of adjustments that are going to be more generalized Rogue things. Starting with talents, we see a bit of a restructure, and you may notice that certain talents are now in a different position. Like the talent that is now below Shadowrunner is going to be Shadowheart, which gives you Leech while in stealth, making it a more optional talent, but also removing and moving Subterfuge way down the line, which kind of makes this right hand side of the talent tree a little bit more selective. Also, another pretty big thing, this should probably be covered first of all, is Acrobatic Strikes got a bit of a change. Now, when you auto-attack a target, Acrobatic Strikes is now going to build up as a debuff, or rather as a buff, that increases your auto-attack damage and movement speed by up to 10%. So you are going to be dealing a little bit more auto-attack damage as a rogue, and your movement is going to be notably increased by a little bit, but this also means that rogues no longer have extra range or extra reach with their melee attacks. In fact, a lot of those extra range or extra melee range increases are going to be a little bit more reined in this expansion. This, for the most part, is a downgrade, but as long as the mobs inside of dungeons and raids have a generous enough hitbox, then hopefully Acrobatic Strike's change is going to be a little bit less noticeable. But also, in some situations, you may not even want to rely on the extra auto attack damage increase with Acrobatic Strikes. Though for Outlaw specifically, there are some auto-attack synergies that you may be able to employ in order to gain a little bit more overall PvE consistency. Oh, also, before we move on further, we have a new update for all rogues in general. Take the Cut, or rather Cut to the Chase, is now going to be passive for every single rogue spec. Cut to the Chase is a talent that allows you main combat finisher, which is Envenom, Dispatch, or Eviscerate depending on your spec, to extend the duration of Slice and Dice by 3 seconds per combo point spent. So for the most part, rogues will no longer have to manage Slice and Dice at all. I probably should have opened up this video with this instead of having to spend your combo points into Slice and Dice as Outlaw or Subtlety. You can now use Dispatch, which is going to extend the duration of Slice and Dice to the point where you don't have to manage it at all. In effect, this removes Slice and Dice from one of those buffs that you will have to essentially manage all that often in all forms of endgame content. Just kind of out of nowhere convenience that is applied for all three specs of rogues, but it's generally nice to see. Back to the talents, however, I do want to explore one of the capstones that's now going to be a little bit different, as this change is going to employ a couple of build adjustments. So in the whole stealth section, you'll notice that Shadow Dance is missing. On this whole section, the stealth section of capstones, we have Soothe the Darkness, which grants healing over time when you Shadow Dance or Vanish. Then we have Subterfuge, which is now going to have maximum 6-second duration, which is going to be removed out of Underhanded Upper Hand for Outlaw. And then we have Without a Trace, which is a Subtlety talent, now becoming a class talent, granting every rogue spec 2 charges of Vanish. This talent is going to be a little bit different depending on the spec. This means for Assassination Rogue, the combination of Shadow Dance and Night Stalker to snapshot your dots is gone. So you'll be using Vanish for that Vanish empowerment for certain abilities such as Garrod, but no longer can use Vanish and Stealth states to amplify your damage. As for Subtlety, this change doesn't necessarily change the way that they play, as they will be the only spec with Shadow Dance. However, for PvP, this also does create a new scenario where now every single rogue has even more escapes than ever before, as every spec can now utilize 2 charges of Vanish to get out of combat much quicker, which is going to be pretty awesome if you're a rogue, but fairly annoying for everybody else. And with that being said, I now want to move on into some of the changes happening to the spec of Assassination. First of all, one of the Dragonflight's tier sets of Rapid Injection is actually making its way as a talent point into Assassination in place of Take Your Cut, where Envenoms will now deal 10% more damage while Envenom buff is active. What this means is Assassination rogues are now going to have to be a little bit more careful with the energy that they spend. And you will want to chain Envenom while the buff is active, and chain multiple Envenoms with one another during the very last seconds of an Envenom, and you'll be able only to do so as long as you have the energy and the damage over time, like from bleeds, actively up on the target. But this now gives you a little bit more of a flow with the energy spending, where you kind of want to bank your energy just so you can maximize those Envenom damage windows, which I think is going to be kind of a fun, a little bit extra additional gameplay for Assassination that actually is something that we've been doing forever now. So for many rogues, this kind of playstyle is going to be familiar, and with that energy spending being a little bit more slowed down, I feel like Sanguination Blades is also going to get a little bit more value. Besides this, we also have an adjustment to Serrated Bone Spike. You will notice that Serrated Bone Spike is the only ability that we have access to where it's no longer a choice between that and Sepsis. But also, Serrated Bone Spike has become a passive, where the rogue will prepare a Bone Spike every 30 seconds, stacking up to 3 maximum. Where Rupture is going to expend one of those stacks to embed a Bone Spike in your target. Also, Bone Spikes will award 1 common point plus an additional common point per active Bone Spike. Gameplay-wise, the application of Bone Spike is actually quite fluid, as it simply just grants you a common point as you use the global in order to apply Rupture on the target. But there's even more combinations with this ability now, ever since it became a passive. You see, what makes this mechanic interesting is because there's quite a lot of talents that interact with the Rupture, and I'm not going to beat around the bush for this one. We're going to be talking about Indiscriminate Carnage. Garrote and Rupture apply to 2 additional nearby enemies when they're used from stealth and for 6 seconds after stealth breaks. However, Serrated Bone Spike doesn't really check in how many spikes it's supposed to do, because every time you send out a Rupture, it's just going to spike the target instantly. So if you are in stealth and you get an opener, you build up a couple of common points from the get-go and you rupture multiple targets, it actually sends a spike to every one of those targets with a Rupture, instantly using up all of your spikes, generating a ton of common points, letting you invest your common points in any way you want to right afterwards. And I don't think the gameplay aspects of the Serrated Bone Spike hitting multiple targets, fueling you full of common points, translate super well into footage. But hear me out when I say that this is one of the coolest mechanics that I've ever got to play with as Assassination. Specifically for Assassination, every opener feels like it's a bit of a setup. There's a lot of things you gotta hit up first. You gotta make sure Ruptures are on as many targets as possible and everybody's bleeding out with Garrote. And the amount of common points you need to invest in the opener is quite hefty. These spikes though do provide you that instant common point generation in the opener, letting you maximize the value of those spikes from the get-go. And in a big group situation, they just help fuel you full of resources so you can get that start up a little bit quicker, which means less micromanagement, less having to tab around from target to target to plant a spike in every one of them, saving you like 3 extra globals, making the spikes so much easier to play around. And as long as you can track the little buff at the top that tells you how many bone spikes you have available, you can then utilize them in order to save you some globals when it comes to generating combo points, which I think is going to be one of those talents that I will try to play into with every single build, though where it sits on a talent tree behind Doomblade, it does make it a little bit of a talent investment point to reach. Besides this, we also got updates to Kingsbane, which feels like it has become the base talent for every single build of Assassination. So to curb it or to allow other talents to shine, Kingsbane will now have a maximum cap of how much damage it can do. So the tooltip for Kingsbane says, each time you apply lethal poison, the target is afflicted by Kingsbane takes 20% additional damage, but now there's a cap of 1000% damage increase. And with talents such as Deathmark, which will duplicate all of your bleeds as well as of your poison applications, for many rogues this was really easy to max out the damage of Kingsbane. So the base damage over time aspect of Kingsbane is being increased, but now there's a new cap to kind of curb some of the degen gameplay and allow other talents to shine outside of pure single target situations. Up next, we have the spec of Outlaw Rogue, and off the bat, our mastery is getting buffed by 24% worth of damage. The mastery itself is still very heavy to RNG, as baseline it grants your main hand attacks roughly a 30% chance to trigger an attack with your offhand that deals additional physical damage. And I wish they changed it to maybe every third main hand combat ability proc your mastery to make it far more consistent. Then maybe it will be a talent that I would feel more likely to invest into. Another adjustment being made to Outlaw Rogue is actually a bit of a nerf with Adrenaline Rush, where they're changing its global cooldown recovery to work off of your haste rather than a passive 25% global. So the more haste you have, the more of cooldown reduction you're going to be able to get from Adrenaline Rush, which makes you more of a haste leaning spec. Then we have the talent of Killing Spree, which now finds a different spot in the talent tree, and it's a little bit easier to pick up and invest into. So far it's been a very fun finisher to play around with, and once our Trickster playstyle finally works, there will be some value to be found when playing Killing Spree as an ability. Count the Odds has also been adjusted as well. Now it causes Ambush, Sunstrike, and Dispatch to have a 10% chance, which is an increase, to grant you a Roll the Bones buff that lasts for 8 seconds. So this passive actually ends up making your whole buff playstyle feel a little bit more consistent. The talent of Ace Up Your Sleeve is in a different spot that allows you to essentially never have to invest into Blade Rush ever again. Though Ace Up Your Sleeve is now going to only reward you with 4 comp points instead of 5 whenever you get resets on you between the eyes finisher. Thief's versatility also has shifted positions and is now 3% versatility instead of 4. Underhanded Upper Hand no longer grants Slice and Dice additional uptime, since that's mostly offset by Cut to the Chase. But you'll still be able to maintain the uptime of Blade Flurry as well as Adrenaline Rush in stealth. Ghost Strike has now moved into a capstone slot where initially Killing Spree was. Also, a lot of the rogues have recently been expressing the idea that they don't really like how Outlaw feels like a subtlety rogue, with Outlaw having a vanish window and a shadow dance window, and it feels like you're a cooldown class rather than a consistency sustain class. So as part of this adjustment and with the changes to vanish abilities, Crack Shot is also seeing a bit of a reduction, with the bonus Dispatches from Area Free Between the Eyes are now going to hit the target for 50% of the normal damage instead of 75%, likely to encourage Outlaw rogues to be able to expand their possibilities in other builds instead of playing a stealth-focused ambush builds. Which is going to be interesting to see how they'll tune the class and what other builds will end up coming up in the future. Though I feel like a lot of those builds will start to open up once our hero specs are actually functional, because Trickster as well as Fatebound are probably going to go through plenty of changes. At least we know Trickster is going to go through changes, as it's no longer going to function off of our Feint. Plus a lot of the talents for either of the hero specs are not really all super functional. So it's really hard to gauge a good picture as to what Outlaw Rogue is going to play like until all of the hero spec components are fully functional. And lastly, we have new updates for Subtlety, starting off with the talent of Premeditation. Because of the changes to Slice and Dice that we see for every single spec of Rogue, Premed is going to work slightly differently. After entering Stealth, instead of granting you free Slice and Dice or extending the duration of your current Slice and Dice, it'll instead grant you full comp points in the opener. Which means that off the bat you can walk up, cheap shot an enemy, and have full comp points off the bat, which is going to be amazing for content such as PvP. Or if you're more of a PvE rogue, you should be able to Shadow Strike into immediate Slice and Dice just so you can get your proper setup going off the bat. Shadow Dance is now available only for Subtlety, and there's now a new talent called Double Dance that allows you to still gain a second charge of Shadow Dance. Also, Shadow Focus will grant you less energy reduction inside of Stealth or Shadow Dance windows. But besides this, Subtlety for the most part plays exactly the same as before, though it is still missing out on one of its hero specs, and while Trickster is kinda still bugged with the final capstone ability, it's been very difficult to test the spec outright. And with that, that's going to be the entirety of the Rogue updates so far on the alpha. Very excited to see what they're going to be doing with Assassination in particular after some of these recent changes, because I feel like speeding up the spec, especially in AoE encounters, is going to be a godsend in the long term. As for the spec of Outlaw, it seems like there's currently a little bit of turbulence, though I want to see what the next few alpha builds are going to bring. Though I do want to pass the question off to you guys in the comments. Would you want to see more stealth-based builds from Outlaw or less? Like, would you prefer playing the spec around Vanish Windows and Crackshot, or would you rather have consistent core gameplay that's less stealth reliant? And also, what do you think about this entire Rogue set of changes in the comments down below? As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.